Yes, good morning once again. This is yours truly, Ambrose Obi. Ambrose Obi is a legal practitioner, a litigation expert, and I want to share with you one of my experiences in an industrial matter. And this time we are looking at, uh, where a letter of termination for a staff is in contest or in competition with a letter of resignation. Which one should take priority? Now, the important thing to note is that a letter of termination, just like a letter of resignation, has the effect of determining the employment and, in fact, destroying the employment contract between the master and the servant. So uh, whichever options the employment will be deemed determined. But what is the position of the law if, for instance, this master had issued a letter of termination to a servant, to an employee, and then the employee, takes the decision to resign instead of seeing through the termination, maybe for whatever reasons, which of these positions will take priority? That's the question. Which of them will take priority? That issue came up in a particular matter at the National Industrial Court. That's Mr. Kunle Mabogunje, Shegun Mabogunje, and ICE Medicare. I was involved in that matter. And so the fact of the matter is that at some point, the company was not, that's the master, the employer, was not satisfied with the work rate of the servant. And then the management of the company decided to terminate the employment of the managing director, who in this case was the claimant. But instead of the managing director accepting the termination, he approached the management and pleaded for some time to prove himself in the matter, in his employment, and that the termination should be withdrawn. And his request was heeded. However, it was not more than 12 days afterwards. Instead of honoring the termination, and continue with his work, he decided to resign. He resigned and left immediately. And 1 year after, he came back, to complain that his employment was wrongfully terminated because he ought to have been given a 3 months notice, which was the requirement in the letter of employment, that either parties could terminate the employment with a 3 months notice or a 3 months salary in lieu of notice. So his argument and that of his lawyer was that in the absence of the 3 months notice, he was entitled to a 3 months salary in lieu of notice. His salary was 600,000 per month, so that came to 1,800,000. And then the matter went on to trial, and eventually the court decided the matter against the claimant, the staff, that he had resigned because one important thing you must note is that while the letter of termination was still running, because he had a 1 month notice a 1 month notice prior to the termination, he opted to resign. That is, if you even take it that the letter of termination was not withdrawn. The letter of termination was still running when he resigned. So he resigned even as a staff. He had not ceased to be a staff when he resigned. But in his own case, in his resignation, he resigned and left immediately. He didn't even stay, to ensure that the notice enjoyed the time. The letter of resignation enjoyed the notice time of 1 month, just like the letter of termination. So what was now for the court to decide was whether the letter of termination took priority to the letter of resignation. But the court came to the conclusion that the claimant actually resigned, so his letter was what was given effect. That is, if you assume that the letter of termination was withdrawn, which was what he argued, that the letter was not even withdrawn, that he resigned. Now, but there are also other issues arising from that matter, which I raised in my final address, that there is also a constructive termination. Constructive termination will be what would have occasioned the resignation. For instance, if the letter of termination was withdrawn in exchange for the request of the staff to resign, so that resignation, being involuntary, will be a constructive termination. And even though the employee resigned, the law will still look at it that it is indeed a termination. So, but in this case, he was not even able to prove constructive termination, and so he lost the case. And so this is why it is important, why when an employer wants to terminate the employment of a servant, of a staff, it's important that you allow yourself to be guided by the terms of employment in the letter of employment, or at worst in the workers' handbook. And in these days, by law, by decided authorities, unlike before, where the law was that you could disengage anybody for any reason or for no reason at all. This time, you are required to actually give your reasons, and it must be tenable. Those reasons must be tenable for you to have your way in the termination of the employment of your staff. I hope that this discussion will guide the decisions of those employers when this time comes, because every time I see these things play out, and then you find that because of the urgency to terminate staff employment, the employers most times do not give heed to law or to rules of engagement, and that's where they always have their hands or fingers burnt. So you employed somebody on the basis of a contract, you must also be good enough to be patient enough to want to comply with that contract of employment, so that you don't have your fingers burnt and then have damages awarded against you in the court of law. You're welcome. Thank you, Lord, for this discussion. Ambrose Obi, as you know, is a legal practitioner and will always, from time to time, make videos like this, just for our information, for our guide, and for our education. So I encourage you, I invite you, subscribe to my YouTube channel, for currency of this manner of videos, and also follow me on my Facebook account and my Instagram, so that you could be current when these posts are made. You are welcome. God bless you.